Good afternoon, everyone, and hope all of you are doing well. Welcome to the second case solving session after our CI break. And this week we have Nathan D'Souza with us, who's currently working as a strategy insights and planning associate at ZS. Thank you for coming over in spite of your hectic schedule, Nathan.
Yeah.
And so we'll begin with a mock interview, after which Nathan will walk us through the case and help us understand his thought process behind it, followed by an interactive Q&A session. So we request all of you to keep yourselves on mute till the interview ends. Over to you, Ria.
All right. So, welcome again, and we'll dive into the case straight away. Your client is a private equity firm that has recently acquired a retail chain called Star Foods. It sells items from groceries right up to heavy consumer durables. This retail chain has 40 stores in Mumbai, evenly spread out.
Okay.
The company receives products from independent distributors and then retails them ahead. The business model of the company is quite similar to big bazaars. So now the revenue stream of this client can be divided into two main parts, that is the electronic products and the conventional products. A very interesting observation made recently was that the revenue from conventional products has been very drastically decreasing.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so a couple of quick points here, right? What I see is our client is a private equity firm, and they've recently acquired a retail chain called Star Foods, right? Now, while the retail chain does sell a lot of groceries upfront, they're also now into the electronic segment, right?
Yes.
Another bit that was interesting for me was while you mentioned that sales for the conventional goods have lowered, I also do see that they've got 40 stores uniformly spread across Mumbai city. So that's an interesting observation, because I think if this is a profitability case, it would most likely also probably tie in later on. But yeah, we can go ahead.
All right. So further, the delivery costs that we see along with the employee costs have also gone up this year. Post this acquisition, in the next year, the revenue of the chain increased by double the amount. So the profitability of the chain, on the other hand, has gone down by 10% from 65% to 55%. So any other retail stores are not facing any similar issues with their profitability. So moving on to the questions. Next slide, Drishti. Before that, we have some additional information for you. The prices of the goods have not changed in the past 1 year. Along with that, no new stores have been opened in this current year. Next is that the electronic products have been very recently introduced, as mentioned. So they contribute to 50% of the revenue, but have a lower profitability as compared to the other sections. So our first question posed here is what are...
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could we just go to the...
Yeah, sure.
Just want to have a look at something. Just the additional information. Just want to have a look. Yeah. Okay. So the third point is introduced and also okay. So all 40 stores have electronic products in them now, and they contribute 50% of the revenue. Got it. Yes. But of course, there will be lower profitability because the margins must be low. Got it. Okay.
All right. So first question here that we will be starting with is what are the possible reasons for this decline in profitability that we see and the rise in costs?
Got it. Okay. Couple of quick observations here, right? So when I look at a profitability case, I could look at it in terms of how you derive profit, right? So it's revenue minus cost. Of course, when we talk about retail chains, we can get to how they're able to derive revenue. There are a slew of ways they can do that. But what we are focusing on right now is, of course, the decline in profitability that could probably be attributed to the cost aspect of things. So based on the things that I've noted down, what I do see is that one, of course, there are 40 stores all across Mumbai city. And as we all know, Mumbai city is mostly divided into 4 different parts. If you look at it that way, you've got the suburbs, South Bombay, you've got the central line, and then you've got, of course, Navi Mumbai, which is not really part of Mumbai city, but it is part of Mumbai in a way or so. So if we've got 40 stores evenly spread across, we do see that rent can vary, which is one of the fixed costs that could be a possible reason behind the decline. So for example, if the rent, let's just take the example of rent in general. We see that in the suburbs, say the rent for a store is 1 lakh, right? But in South Bombay, of course, given that it's more expensive, the rent could be almost 2 lakhs or even double, right? So just in general, double, which could lead to ununiform, rent versus revenue ratio. So when we're looking at this, revenue versus rent ratio. So for example, it's possible that while the stores where the rent is lower are getting in enough profit to either break even, revenue in order to either break even or get into the profitability segment of things, we do see that probably in the more expensive areas, we do not see that much revenue to probably offset all the costs with respect to rent. Another aspect that was noted down before, was the delivery and the employees, right? Now the employees, of course, if the costs have increased there, that could be actually attributed to the fact that we've got in electronics. And usually when we've got something that's more technical in nature, there's a lot of more training that's required. So ideally, training employees could also increase the cost per employee that's being spent by our client. Then do we have an idea as to what the logistics are like? Is this more of a single warehouse distributing to multiple outlets, or is it,
All right.
distributors?
So the delivery structure here is that basically they are built on the number of trips that the trucks make.
Okay.
And recently there have been no changes in the number of trucks that are employed by the retail store right now.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So transportation is definitely heavy, right? Because again, we're talking about Mumbai city, a lot of traffic, a lot of traveling as well. Well, if I have to go from Churchgate to Borivali, it's going to take me at least 3 hours minimum in heavy traffic. Now, one more point here is with respect to transportation in general. Since we've introduced electronics, it's possible that they take up a lot more space when you're making these trips versus the conventional goods like groceries and other things. So that could also be a possible reason, because the cost there is more, because the trucks will have to make more trips between locations to transport the same amount of goods. But in this case, it would be electronic goods, which were just recently introduced. And then I think those were the 3 things that I could think of in terms of possible reasons. So just to summarize, one would be the rent, right? Second would be employee costs, given the fact that we've introduced electronic goods, there needs to be more training in place. And the third one would be transportation, wherein we would talk about just the extra number of trips that the trucks have to make in order to make these deliveries possible.
All right. So beginning with these 3, I feel that you're on the right track with the employee cost as well as the transportation cost, because as you know, electronic products, as you said, are quite technical. So the efforts to selling obviously does increase. And when it comes to transportation, they take up so much space if you're taking examples of bigger products like a washing machine. So obviously the space in one trip becomes much more lesser. So that was quite good. That's an interesting observation when it comes to the rent, however. The rent actually, the area in the new stores have gone up by 33%, while the revenue in each of these stores have increased by 100%. So what do you make of that?
So basically we're saying 33% is what the store size is increased by, and then revenue is, okay. Got it. So I think here what we do see is, of course, we're looking at the introduction of so just to kind of reiterate the fact of revenue and how usually grocery or retail outlets get their revenue by. There are 3 main places or segments I would probably see revenue coming in from. One, of course, is shelf placement, which is very important to this particular question. Of course, second is, of course, the revenue that they get through the products that they sell, the store sells. And the third one, of course, is if the store is big enough, you would have other outlets like restaurants and things like that, probably renting out space within the store. Now, the shelf placement is important here, just because I think it was mentioned earlier, wherein, the electronics, so it was mentioned before that the electronics, while they contribute 50% of the revenue, their margins are lower. So if electronics are taking up more shelf space, it means there's less space for the conventional goods, which tend to sell faster as well, because those are more necessary in daily life. So what I would say here is, while the space is increased, there's also a big increase in electronic products, and that could take up more space versus the conventional products or the groceries that we have. And that could be a possible reason behind which we see that per square feet that's there in the store, we're seeing lesser sales happening just because the electronics are taking up space.
Right. So I believe that the self-space point came quite, that is a very valid point, because again, visibility plays a very big role. And one thing that this retail chain observed was when electronic products came in, they took up most of the shelf space. So the immediate eye that falls was on the electronic products. So what is the overall observation that you can make when it comes to the sort of revenue structure here and the costs that we've analyzed?
Yeah, okay. So I think in terms of revenue, I see a very clear path in terms of, one, of course, shelf placement and the revenue that they derive from it. That could be the possible revenue from, if they're letting out or renting out space within the store as well. And then, of course, we've got the basic sale of goods as well. One key example I could give here is, while we've all heard of Walmart, we do realize that while Walmart has a ton of revenue, I think back in 2019, it was around $500 million. The margins that they have is a lot lesser, right? So the margin, sorry, $500 billion, their margins are around 1% for these goods. So if conventional goods have a margin of around 1%, I'm fairly certain electronics would have a lower margin here, and the revenue would probably be derived by that. When we talk about cost, I would again summarize it based on just three factors. I would talk about the rent, wherein we see that while the store sizes have increased, the possibility of electronics taking up more space have also dampened the sales that can happen per square feet in a store. And of course, given the location of the store, it could be possible that they're not deriving enough sales for what they're paying as rent in that particular location. Then secondly, of course, employees, again, more technical expertise, more training sessions, so that's very important. And then that would also bring in an uptake in costs. And the last one, which is transportation, again, electronics take up more space in a truck, so that would mean more, transportation costs because there are more trips that are happening, and that would drive up costs as well.
All right, that's quite detailed. Let's move on to the next question.
Okay.
So how can your client increase their profitability? Any recommendations further?
Okay, so of course, we've been talking a lot about the rent, and it's important to kind of see how the performance of each of the stores are, right? If there are stores that are probably just not turning a profit over an extended period of time, or even are not even breaking even, they might have to revisit how they are trying to, bring in that kind of footfall in customers, and what is it that's not working for them? Is it because there are too many electronics taking up space versus less conventional products, which, like I mentioned earlier, sell faster? That's one, right? So it's important to kind of see by store what's working in a particular store versus what's not working, and probably having a more streamlined process in terms of what's the winning formula in terms of the balance between electronic goods and the conventional goods. Then secondly, electronics, like we've been talking about since earlier, the margins are lower, right? So it's important to kind of see if we can find a way. Just tying back to the first point, wherein we see that conventional goods get the better shelf space, whereas electronics can be more of a add-on, right? So for example, there are a lot of stores that we see that sell electronics, but they might not sell it full-fledged just because the margins are not as high. And I think the most important point here would be the distribution, right? As mentioned earlier, I think a lot of stores in the modern era tend to have a central distribution center versus getting in from multiple vendors and probably transporting it a lot across the city. One of my key recommendations here to probably increase profitability in the long run, not really looking at the short run, would be having a centralized distribution center, which transports all of the goods from one particular place versus it coming from numerous different sources.
All right. So move on to the third question. Now, the client has expressed their interest in entering into the e-commerce space.
Okay.
Do you think that they should explore this as an avenue? And if yes, what are your factors and reasonings behind this? What do you think would be a possible impactful reason to enter into the space or not enter into the space?
Got it. Okay. I just had a couple of questions before diving into this. Does the client want to keep this domestic, as in within India, or do they want to probably hash out into the global market as well with the launch of this platform?
All right, that's an interesting question. They have not explored the avenue of global sources till now.
Okay. And how does the competitor space look here? Is it very crowded? Are there a lot of e-commerce platforms selling of course, groceries as well as electronics? All in one.
Right. So you can assume the competitive space to be like there is right now. There's Big Basket, Grofers, and take them in the same sort of size and market share that they hold.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So right off the bat, we do see that the barrier to entry is pretty high, right? Just because we've got well settled firms that are already selling groceries, they're selling electronics as well in the form of Chroma and Reliance Digital, things like that, or firms like that. So right off the bat, we do see that the barrier of entry is higher, but it also depends on what the aspirations of our clients are. One, of course, like you mentioned, since it's domestic, it would be a good start to probably see whether we want to try out the model in the city of Mumbai and then hash out to other cities or tier 1 cities and then go from there. Two, one of the most key, or rather the key aspect of e-commerce in today's day and age is, of course, the logistics, right? While sending across goods to different parts of the city or different countries is possible, the last mile delivery takes up a lot of effort. In fact, I recall this video I've seen wherein most of the cost that's associated with delivery is actually majority of it. In fact, is the last mile delivery. So when I say last mile delivery, I'm talking about a order reaching from particular fulfillment center of a particular company to the doorstep of a customer. And that takes up a lot of time and effort because you need vans, you need cars, you need bikes, you need people who are trained, and all of that good stuff. So logistics is going to be interesting, and then that's where the Amazon model comes in, wherein they pretty much own the entire logistical framework. So they have the planes to deliver across cities, countries. They have, of course, the fulfillment centers well spaced out in all of the tier 1 cities, tier 2 cities. They even own the robots that actually transport goods within the warehouse. So that minimizes the efforts that humans put, and that means basically lesser people working on the floor and lesser time being spent, transporting goods within a warehouse for delivery. So I think these are the important factors. And at the end of the day, I think while it's a good idea, it would need some amount of time, right? And since e-commerce usually does not turn out a profit in the shorter term, this is more of a long-term plan. So the idea is, one, how long is the client willing to wait to turn a profit, right? Two, we also need to see what is it that is not currently being met in the current scenario versus the competitors. So is it that the delivery is not as fast? Is it that the variety of options available for fast delivery is not there? Things like that. So I think ideally the client needs to understand or probably see if this is coming to part B of the question, right? The possible factors. They need to see if where is it that they want to probably turn a profit. Is it long term or is it short term? Of course, if it's short term, then this might not be a great idea because the barrier of entry, like I mentioned earlier, is a lot higher. Two, the logistics, right? Is it going to be all in-house or is it going to be sourced out to a different vendor? So a lot of smaller e-commerce sites tend to nowadays deliver their goods through Dunzo or we've got, I think, BeFast, these courier companies that if you have a partnership with them, they of course bargain a more bulk deal versus the others. And then, of course, last but not the least, just the basic fulfillment need. Is it that customers need our client to probably launch an e-commerce platform? Is there that dire need wherein they need to dwell into it? If there isn't, or if there's not really a demand for it, our client would probably just incur more costs and not really turn out the profit in the long run even.
All right, that's a fair analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll go to the last question.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically just synthesize the case and your final recommendations to your client.
Got it. Okay. Would this include the e-commerce bit, or would just
along with
okay, got it. Sounds good. Right. So what we do see is that our client it recently acquired a retail chain called Star Foods. They've got 40 stores all across city of Mumbai. Right now, what we do see is that while the profits have, or rather the revenue has doubled, their profits have actually decreased by around 10% from 65 to 55. A couple of interesting findings here was just the fact that one, they introduced electronic products recently, which did take up a lot more, shelf space in their stores, which also led to their employees, these employees being trained more because there's a technical aspect to it. And what we do see is that given this increased technical training, there's an increase in cost there as well. So both the employees as well as the transportation bit, wherein they're making more trips now, like the distributors are making more trips in the trucks across stores and across driving from stores to just the rest customers. What we do see is that's an increased cost as well. So just to probably summarize all of it in terms of just stores, what we do see is that one, the costs have increased primarily because of the employee costs that have increased, as well as the transportation or delivery in general. This could also be attributed to the rent. Ways we could probably mitigate this would be centralization, which is basically having one central warehouse or a couple of central warehouses from where deliveries happen. So there's less back and forth with respect to delivery. We could also look at increasing the shelf space for conventional products, which tend to sell faster, versus electronic goods, which could take more of a backseat just because the margins are also lesser with respect to electronic goods. And then just coming to the last point in terms of e-commerce, while e-commerce might work out in the long term, it really depends on what the goals of the client are. Is it that they want to turn out a short-term profit, or is it a long-term profit? If it's a short-term profit, the barrier of entry for a particular client is very, very high. And that looks unlikely given the current market dynamics. But if it's long-term, it's very important that they first understand if there's a particular need in the market for an e-commerce platform from Star Foods. And then secondly, if there is a need, how would they plan out their logistics? Would it be more of a in-house capability, or would it be more of third-party vendors carrying out these logistics? Because the main cost here would, of course, come with the logistics, and just looking at the overall outlook for the long term, it would be important to see what would work for them. Yeah, that is how I would summarize the case.
All right, that's great. We can end the case.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was quick. 30 minutes.